Hello everyone, this is Darion GNB here, and today we're going to be taking a look at Netflix's Devil May Cry. Netflix's Devil May Cry is an anime adaptation of the video game series of the same name. The show centers around a powerful devil hunter named Dante, getting thrusted into the middle of an upcoming war between the human and demon realm, with his mother's amulet and his mysterious past being the key to it all. I love the Devil May Cry series, and have been waiting for the show to come out since it was initially announced in 2018. With Adi Shankar at the helm as producer, the guy who also produced the first two seasons of Netflix's Castlevania, which were two seasons that I quite enjoyed. So there was really no reason for me to personally think that this show was going to be a train wreck. I especially had no reason to think it was going to be worse than the last DMC anime we got, which I did a video on not too long ago. To paraphrase some of my thoughts from that video, I thought the OG anime was solid, but it was really held back by it being canon to the games, because you can only really get and enjoy some of the deeper intricacies of the characters and the world if you'd already been exposed to the prior games. As such, when you view it as an anime separate from the whole Devil May Cry franchise, it really is just alright. The episodic format was fine, but none of the characters were really as fleshed out as they could have been, especially compared to the games. So the Netflix show being its own thing automatically negated that problem for me. So I was just anxiously waiting to see what Shankar and the others working on the show had in store. The more marketing came out for the show, the more excited I got, and after 7 long years of waiting, I can safely say Netflix's Devil May Cry is just kinda okay. I was way more mixed on the show than I initially thought I'd be, and in the time since its release, that feeling hasn't changed, and in some aspects has gotten slightly worse. That's due to a variety of different factors that I'll get into later, but first, let us talk about the plot. The plot of this show is something I find to be very fascinating, because it has the general makings of a DMC plot, demons attacking, planning to take over the human world, and all that jazz. But it's told with an added thematic layer that both irritates and intrigues me. For the intriguing part, I guess I'll say that on its own, I can respect Shankar and the other writers attempting to have the war on terror play a key part in some of the parts for the human perspective. Shankar openly stated before the show dropped that the show would take place around the time post 9/11, and the show would kind of reflect that time in the early 2000s. When he said that, I thought it'd just be little allusions to that real world stuff here and there, and not have it be a recurring theme in the story. And unfortunately, that's kind of where the irritating parts start to creep in as well. Because while I'm not opposed to political stuff being discussed in the media I consume, this in of itself shouldn't even really be in a Devil May Cry show. Stuff like the damaging effects of American imperialism, or the paranoia and fear of the 9/11 attack, or other terrorist attacks and stuff brought on just isn't something that you can put in a Devil May Cry project without it feeling super out of place. But again, that stuff being in the show alone isn't the irritating part. The irritating part for me is just how hammered in these themes and messages are. Time and again, this show will throw in dialogue and scenes that feel borderline satirical with how they're executed. But no, it's just played completely straight. Constantly needing to hammer in the point of prejudice towards others, all the you think blank are the same and there aren't any normal ones talking points. Constantly bringing up humanity's nature to kill first, think later above all else, and label their heinous actions as being under some higher divine purpose. At every turn, they want to keep bringing this shit up, and it gets exhausting. I'm being genuinely serious when I say all they needed to do was dial it back a little bit. Not even that much, or have it removed from the show. But if they just dialed it back and actually had faith in the audience to naturally get a grasp on all of this stuff, it would have been infinitely better. The writing and overall tone could have used some more work as well. The tone, for the most part, I'm fine with. It feels more in line with the games than that of the 2013 reboot, for example, where the tone and writing there was incredibly crass and raunchy and stuff. Thankfully, that isn't the case for Netflix DMC, but it still has a noticeable problem for me, and it's the constant lampshading and unserious angle it takes sometimes. Whether it be going over the past of Dante or Sparta, or hell, even some of the show's attempts with humor, they feel the constant need to present them in an unserious and nonchalant light, or make some stupid and corny joke out of it, and it's just something I'm not a fan of. It's funny how the two pieces of DMC media not involved with the original series have a problem with forced themes and messaging being hammered in constantly, and adopting writing techniques and styles that are very common around the time they were released, but never managed to make it work in a natural way with DMC. Because this particular writing style has been something Hollywood writers have been doing for ages now, and it's really starting to annoy me. And it annoys me in DMC especially, because even in some of the game's cornier moments, there's a sense of charm from the sincerity that comes with it. That Dark Soul with Light Bit in DMC1 is unintentionally hilarious to this day, But imagine if we got a remake where right after Dante says that line, he makes some comment about it sounding better in his head or some shit. It automatically ruins any attempt of seriousness they were trying to have. And that vibe is sprinkled in all throughout the show, and it's, again, really irritating. The pacing I found to be pretty solid for the most part. It never feels like an episode has too many things crammed in or unnecessarily dragging itself out. For the story they wanted to tell in these 8 episodes, I think it all came together fairly well. Something else I wanted to talk about was the world this show is set in. There are some neat little twists and change-ups they make to the usual lore of the series, and even some ideas I wouldn't mind making their way into the games themselves. In the first episode, this scientist guy alludes to demons coming from a line of evolved humans that somehow were transported to the other realm. Stuff like that I find to be a little fascinating, and I kinda wish the show delved more into unique stuff like that. And hell, the organization known as Darkcom I thought was a cool idea as well. Even with some of the faults that comes with this whole thing that I'll discuss later, a high-grade military organization dedicated to eliminating demons just sounds so fucking cool. And I wouldn't mind something like this in the games at some point. But there are a few things this show does in regards to the world that I'm not fond of. Not flat out hate, but stuff that does bother me just a bit. To bring it back to what I mentioned earlier with Adi Shankar saying he based the show in a post-9/11 early 2000s setting, if you already couldn't tell from the stuff I had mentioned up until now, the world in this show is very much meant to reflect our reality, with constant discussion of American politics and ideologies, and the show being primarily set within New York City. And I don't like it. Shankar's DMC being set in a more realistic world as opposed to a fictitious one, with a bunch of different fictional locations and cities that clearly have real-world inspirations, but are still kind of their own thing, automatically makes the world of Netflix DMC a little more boring for me. Because, and maybe this is just a me thing, I had always wondered about stuff like what part of the world Dante keeps shop in. Like, we know the town he and Virgil grew up in, Redgrave City, is a clearly London-inspired location, but we never get a clue as to where Dante keeps his DMC office. Based on shots in DMC 3 and the bits we see in the old Madhouse anime, it looks like a more rural location, not exactly a small town, but just someplace that doesn't have too much going on, if that makes any sense. But in the Netflix show, instead of trying to pick someplace unique, they just established Dante in New York. The most overused place in all of fiction. It's not something that has any bearing on my opinion of the show, it's just one of a few nitpicks I got. Something else that bothers me is apparently how many devil hunters are in this damn city. Now, the idea of there being other devil hunters or paranormal specialists outside of Dante and the Devil May Cry business isn't something I'm against. Canonically in the games universe, Lady and Trish are always off doing their own thing, doing their own jobs and taking out demons separately from Dante's Devil May Cry business. So there being a bunch of demons and spirits and stuff all over the place where Dante isn't always available, and having other demon hunters take care of them is something I'm kind of okay with. My problem is, why the fuck are they all in the same city? This isn't the Marvel universe, we don't need all of you motherfuckers in one place. And funnily enough, this montage scene established those like Lucia from DMC2 being active, which is pretty cool. Hopefully this alludes to her potentially having a more central role in future episodes. And someone who I thought looked familiar, and then I saw some folks saying that this is probably Gru from the DMC1 prequel novel, which, if that truly is the case, is pretty cool. Alright, let's talk about the Makaians, because they're probably one of the main things I've been mixed on since watching the show. The first thing I kind of want to bring up is that I've seen a few folks suggest that the Makaians' mere existence in this story completely lessens the impact of the character of Sparta. The Dark Knight Sparta and his rebellion was a big deal because it's in a demon's nature to be vile, evil, and cruel, but Sparta was different. He awoke to justice and rebelled against his kind in order to save the human world. Some folks seem to think that the Makaians just being nothing but kind-hearted demons who just want to live their lives free from the shackles of the tyrannical and oppressive overlords of the demon world makes Sparta and his turn to good less special, and that it even goes as far as throwing away the Devils Never Cry theme of the DMC series. And I personally can't help but disagree with this particular take, and that's mainly because the DMC franchise has shown us demons, once separated from Sparta and his influence, that have the easy capabilities of being kind and sympathetic, and even falling in love. Characters like Trish, even if her development in that first game left a little bit to be desired, Lucia, and that one guy whose name I forget from the Madhouse DMC anime. The series has shown us that while it's rare for demons to be like this, it ain't impossible for there to be a large quantity of kind-hearted demons. So there being a group of demons who are just trying to survive and stuff, I think plays well within the wheelhouse of what the game's universe established. And as for the whole Devils Never Cry aspect of it all, Devils Never Cry is a theme that's constantly reiterated over the course of the series. It's repeated as a means to showcase the innate goodness within a demon. Because if a demon can express emotions such as sadness, love, empathy, etc., then they're not truly a demon at heart. In their heart, they are human. But in regards to how that theme translates into Netflix DMC, I don't think the Makaians simply being here automatically removes that theme, because they make it a point to show that the lower Makaians are just a minority, a subsection of demons, with the monstrous and tyrannical overlords like Mundus and other demons that creep into the human world to cause harm being the majority. I don't think the Devil's Never Cry theme is completely absent from this show. When they make it a point that the high ruling demons who fit the vile and cruel criteria far outnumber the lower Makaians, who have more compassion and kindness. Does this work as well as it does in the games? Probably not, but again, it's not like the theme was entirely thrown out the window. None of that stuff was a problem for me. Hell, I'll even say the base storyline they had going on wasn't that bad. That ain't me saying it's good, but it's not terrible. Doing the whole blank monster thing is actually nice and stuff, and humanity is the true evil isn't really unique at all, and isn't really something that I think works that well in a Devil May Cry show. But I think it works fine enough for the context of this story. My main problem with the Makaians, though, is that they are basically just used as nothing but fuel for the allegorical themes that I complained about earlier. And just how much they want to bash you over the head with them.
You think we're with them?
She's a sapien. Of course she thinks all demons are the same.
Do you get it, guys? Do you get the message? And by the end of the whole season, when we just see a bunch of them get continuously slaughtered by the US military, after everything we had seen been done to them up to this point, I just couldn't care anymore. Again, these things being touched on in this show isn't bad. They don't really have a place in a DMC show at all, but it ain't a bad idea to tackle these things here. I just don't like when media wants to constantly and non-subtly bash in the same consistent message over and over like I'm a child and I won't get it. And it's especially annoying in this show because it is shown that the writers are capable of some pretty good storytelling without needing to verbally say the themes out loud. Episode 6 is easily the best episode out of these 8 for that very reason. It's an entire episode with absolutely zero dialogue except for the last few minutes. And it's told solely with its visuals, music, etc. And it's executed brilliantly and does wonders for the characters of Mary and the rabbit. And hell, while I'm talking about it, I might as well give the few thoughts I have on this show's depiction of the demon world. Now, the demon world itself is a location in the games we've only seen a few glimpses of. The locations we go to throughout the games puts us through portals or small areas where we're never shown the entire scope of what the demon world is. Like, we know canonically there is a section known as the Fire Hell, where guys like Burial are from, and it's presumably a different spot than some of the other places we've seen. I say all this because this show's depiction of the demon world didn't exactly have too much to go on, and yet it still felt kind of disappointing. Now, just like in the games universe, we don't see too much of the wider demon world, but the stuff we do see, I think, is enough to give a bit of a fair stance. I think it looks fine, like, it's alright. I think the stuff we see in episode 6 looks great, visually at least. Like, I can't say it looks terrible, but even when we see other locations and places the characters are fighting in, it just kind of looks bland after a while. I think the reason why is because a few of the glimpses we see of the demon world in the games almost have this kind of ethereal, gothic, and eerie vibe to it, you know? And this doesn't really live up to that, if that makes any sense. And it's just kind of generic looking. This kind of falls under another nitpick for me, like the whole Dante being in New York thing, where it's something that irks me but doesn't really have any strong bearing on my opinion of the overall show. But I think it's going to be a bigger problem if we're going to be spending more time in the demon world in the following episodes. Now for the characters. The cast of characters we have in this show, I have a lot of thoughts on. As a whole, I'll say I enjoyed the characters we focused on in this season, but that doesn't mean they're perfectly written, because they're really freaking not. Let's start things off with Dante. I think Dante was handled pretty well in this show. For the most part, that is. There's a particular problem that both he and Mary have, as far as their personalities being adapted for this show, so I'll go more into it when discussing her, but Dante I think was handled pretty well all things considered. Dante over the course of the season doesn't have too big of an arc, as most of the season is him discovering and coming to grips with being half demon, which is an interesting route to take for this story. They make certain changes to Dante's background compared to how he was in the games. I think Dante not knowing he's a demon or the son of Sparta works well as a means of having the audience learn all this stuff alongside him, which I think works fine for this narrative. I find it odd, however, that they wrote in the fact that neither Dante or Virgil even met Sparta. As of now, I have no idea why they felt the need to implement something like that for this story, when I think it could have worked fine enough had they just kept it like it was in the games, where Sparta was a prominent part of the twins' lives before he disappeared. But in the end, I think it works well for Dante's story in this show so far. Despite not knowing Sparta, he still fights to live by his example and what he stood for, because that's the example that Eva would always instill into Dante whenever he asked about his father. And I think that's a pretty sweet way of tying Dante's appreciation for both of his parents in this story. But more problems start to arise when you take just a deeper look at how they handle Dante here. You see, Netflix Dante is for the most part a good adaptation of the character from the games in my opinion. His personality, mannerisms, and attitude line up fairly well with how he is in the games. But it's the more subtle Dante traits that they fumble with that makes this Dante a little less enjoyable in some aspects for me. Both Dante and Mary in this show suffer from a problem of the writers taking certain aspects and traits of their personalities and dialing them up to the point where they kind of become unnecessarily annoying at best and borderline insufferable at worst. For example, Dante in the games is a cocky, wisecracking, pizza-loving devil hunter. Now on the surface, those traits are very consistent with the Netflix version of Dante, except when you take a closer look at both versions of this character, you start to notice more cracks forming. When Dante jokes or wisecracks in the games, his jokes and taunts are told in a more tongue-in-cheek sort of way. There's a certain je ne sais quoi with the way game Dante taunts and insults his enemies that Netflix Dante doesn't really capture. Netflix Dante primarily resorts to ill-fitting your mom jokes.
I heal extremely fast, like a superhero. Not that I call myself a superhero, but your mom does.
Or awkward pop culture references that just don't feel that natural for this character.
Skeletor did not hold up since the 80s. Remind me again, which of you is the Human Torch knockoff and which is the talking leaf blower? And I've got some bad news. You didn't get that callback for the Chuck E. Cheese band auditions.
Another thing is that this nigga is a goddamn chatterbox. Dante's personality in the games is very low-key. Yeah, he has those moments of going full wacky woohoo pizza man or whatever, but that's just it. Moments. As for the most part, he's a relatively calm and collected individual that isn't written as some constant yapper, and the Netflix show almost got that right. In the first 2 or 3 episodes, his demeanor and attitude was pretty well handled in my opinion. Whether it be when he's intimidating Enzo or some of the dialogue he has in episode 1, his natural, more low-key demeanor seems pretty intact. It's when the show continues on that we get more moments that show him as awkward and super chatty, and it just doesn't work for me. At least in the way they handled it here. They also make Dante a little less competent than his game counterpart. Now that's not to say he's a complete dumbass in this show, but there are a few moments where his lack of awareness of certain things is played up for jokes. And it's annoying because now I'm seeing newer fans have the impression that Dante's a dumbass, when he's really not. He's not some Bruce Wayne level genius or anything, but he's shown several times in the OG series that he's pretty attentive and can pick up on certain cues and details fairly well. And it sucks that they went this route for the sake of humor, when all it does is make our lead look unnecessarily incompetent. Which on its own wouldn't be a giant issue, but this is Dante we're talking about here. The biggest thing that highlights this issue for me is Dante not knowing he's part demon. Even if he didn't know he was Sparta's son, I think it should be reasonable to assume that with all the shit he can do, that he's not human. But no, he just chalks it up to superhero bullshit or whatever.
Yeah, I've got abilities. Maybe not exactly human ones, but they're, I don't know, some sort of superhero mutations.
It's annoying for me because this story could have played out the same had they just written it as Dante being aware of being part demon, but being in denial of it, rather than just him being a straight up idiot and not knowing. I apologize if my thoughts surrounding Dante feel a little bit all over the place, but that's primarily because this version of the character does an equal amount of right and wrong when it comes to adapting him. It's a different kind of problem than what Reboot Dante was. Reboot Dante was far removed from anything game Dante should ever be. But here with the Netflix show, it's more faithful. But when you look at the small details between the two versions, it kind of just throws some of my enjoyment off. Like I said, they make him way chattier, and his energy is a bit too high some of the time. Some of the jokes and pop culture references he pulls feel a bit out of place, and as a whole, make him feel just a little bit less like Dante. Like I said, it's a different kind of frustration than with something like that of the reboot, because I can see with this show, they're so close to making a good version of Dante, but they just barely missed it, and that's the disappointing part. Dante isn't terribly written in this show. He had a pretty interesting journey throughout the season and was fun to watch, but like I said, some of his traits they turned up or tweaked to a point where he feels less like Dante, and more like a Dante impersonator, who's doing a decent job all things considered, but still isn't fully Dante, if that makes any sense. Another aspect of Dante I want to bring up is how powerful he is. I've seen most DMC fans be up in arms about Dante being weaker in this show, but honestly, that's one of the aspects I love most about Netflix Dante. I think it's a bit ridiculous how much this bit has been blown up. I've seen more folks take issue with the power scaling aspect of Dante in this show, more than how his personality is written. But like I said, this is an aspect I really enjoy about Dante in this show. This is something I and many others complained about with the Madhouse DMC anime, that Dante felt so powerful it never felt like there was any actual stakes. And even when they tried to introduce some near the end, it never lasted long, and Dante wipes out the big boss demon almost as quickly as he takes out any other demon in this show. It's cool seeing Dante get put into situations he can't punch, stab, and shoot his way out of. It keeps things interesting, and it's not like it doesn't work in some of the show's various contexts. There is definitely a point to be made in how inconsistent they portray his abilities, but I think at least some of these can be easily explained away. I'm almost compelled to go through some of these individually to see what I mean. Actually, I think I will. I've been thinking about this shit for months. I can honestly believe this Dante getting taken out by Mary and her squad, despite showing the reflexes and agility he has, by running with the idea that he's not in the right headspace with her almost getting away with his mother's amulet, something he clearly holds near and dear to his heart because it's part of what awakens his devil trigger. A character trait Netflix Dante routinely exhibits is he gets very emotionally overwhelmed whenever stuff like his family is involved. Not to mention the fact he was running into this room thinking he'd corner her, only to get completely caught off guard and bombarded with taser bullets. Given that context, I don't think this is too unbelievable for this version of Dante. As well as him being detained by Darkcom, this organization that's given high-grade tech that can take down demons, and have presumably been around for a while before Mary or Dante were even on their radar. So him not being able to get the restraints off so easily is pretty plausible. Not to mention, this is still a Dante who, while more powerful than any human, still has barely begun to tap into his true demonic power yet. Please keep that statement in mind, because it will be important in just a bit. I also saw some folks upset that he got incapacitated when a fucking bomb blew half his face up. We've never seen Dante take that level of damage before, and I think it worked well for this story. Plus, this just looks sick as hell. Dante having a hard time with Agni and Rudra when he was clowning them earlier, along with the other demons, feels a bit weird, but I personally chalk that up to him not fully recovering just yet, and the news about his Sparta lineage being something that throws him off as well. I think that's very likely because they keep throwing his family's tragedy in his face, and that, alongside getting his ass kicked, caused him to pop his devil trigger. Speaking of which, this is another thing I want to briefly touch on. Not only is the situation surrounding Dante's devil trigger another point of contention from fans, it's also the point where the way they write Dante and his abilities starts to make less sense for me personally. I think the circumstances behind Dante's transformation make sense. With the reveal of being Sparta's son thrown in his face, them fucking him up, and him working to save everyone on the plane, I don't think it's that far removed from how we've seen previous DT transformations. Or at least how they operate, I mean. We know in the games the characters obtain their devil trigger from a wide range of physical or psychological trauma. Dante and Virgil first awoke theirs whenever they had a near-death experience. Meanwhile, Nero fully awoke his devil trigger when he tried to stop Dante and Virgil, the only family he had left, from killing each other. So this Dante having his entire past thrown at him full throttle, as well as being continuously pushed physically, works well for this version of Dante's story. Is it less interesting than the other ones I mentioned? Fuck yeah, but like some of the other things this show does, I think it works well with what we know from the games. My problem as far as them writing how powerful Dante is that after he transforms, you'd think he'd be able to handle these two no sweat. But they still show him struggling. He gets some good licks in here and there, but it doesn't really feel like Dante after this point got that much more powerful. I like that it lasts for a limited time, makes things interesting as we never had to see Game Dante deal with stuff like that, but then not too long afterwards they have Mary shoot him so she can confront the rabbit on her own, and this is the bit that feels the laziest for me. After awakening his devil trigger, it's crazy to think that a bullet and an armored truck could hold back Dante. He still got out of it, but you know this specific moment was just to sideline Dante for the sake of giving him a cool entrance later. It just feels cheap and lazy, and it is the only part of this whole issue that felt too forced for me. Mary unfortunately suffers from similar issues Dante has writing-wise, but probably more severe, where they exaggerate certain character traits to the point where it becomes bothersome. For some reason, the writers of Netflix DMC thought of taking Lady's kinda aggressive and somewhat bitchy attitude from previous installments in the series and turn it up to an 11. And it sucks with the way they handled it because this is an aspect of her character that I've kinda missed. With DMC 4 and 5 not centering much on Lady and Trish, it feels like Lady got watered down a tad. Not entirely, but the kind of aggressive attitude she was introduced with in DMC 3 just wasn't carried over into those games, and was only carried over into the Madhouse anime. I like that aspect of Lady's personality, and it makes her interactions with the other characters there fun and memorable. Here, they overblow those traits to where she just kind of becomes annoying. Not entirely, as there were aspects of her character I still enjoyed, but whether it came to them leaning so heavily on her hatred for demons, or just making her in general unnecessarily antagonistic, it just never felt right. It was just super forced. And then there's her dialogue, or more specifically, her swearing. This has been complained about ad nauseum, so I'll try to make it brief and say the problem with ladies swearing in this show is akin to something I said in my Has Been Hotel video, and it's that the usage of the swears just feels very juvenile. Most of the time they feel forced into a sentence with no rhyme or reason. And I know it's primarily meant to highlight how intense she is or whatever, but like I said, it just comes across as really juvenile. It only serves to make her character less enjoyable for me. They make some changes to Lady's background in this story, and I think for the most part it works relatively well, but it still has me feeling a bit mixed. Them choosing to take Arkham, one of the best villains this series has to offer, from a sinister and vile man who sacrificed his wife for demonic power, to a man desperate to protect his family, driving him over the edge, to the point where he inadvertently kills his wife, is certainly a choice. I find it fascinating that they went with the whole power to protect motif with Arkham of all characters, when more often than not it's associated with Virgil. And it really makes me wonder even more what their direction for Virgil is going to be for this story. Lady's story is so intrinsically tied to Arkham. Her hatred of demons in the games primarily stems from hating him because of his obsession with demonic power. And it's weird because I can imagine another version of this story where they still found a way to incorporate that into this show, but they just didn't for some reason. I think this version of the story works well for this show, but completely removing Arkham from the picture, not even attempting to tie in any of that stuff from DMC3, kind of feels like a missed opportunity. Like with Dante, I for the most part enjoyed her story this season. I think her coming around to trusting demons could have been handled a tad better, but given the context of her encountering ones like the Makaians beforehand, it does make sense why she'd be more lenient the second time around. Though I still do think the turnaround could have been executed a bit more naturally. I can't even say she's a terrible character, but her personality and dialogue really hold me back from saying I love this version of Lady. And you've probably noticed by now I've refrained from calling her Lady when talking about this show, and it's mainly because that name has zero significance for this version of the character. In the games, when we meet Lady, she's already committed to not being called Mary, and so Dante just gives her the name Lady because he didn't know what else to call her. And Mary eventually accepts the name Lady as a means of distancing herself from her vile and evil father, who was the one who named her, and it's a means of manipulation he tries to hold over her throughout the course of the game's story. Compare that to here, where Dante starts out by calling her Lady because he doesn't know her name. He hears her name several times throughout the season, but still chooses to call her Lady instead of Mary, because Lady just sounds better or some shit. And then Mary just decides to go along with it, for whatever reason. The name literally has no meaning for this story, so why would I even bother calling her Lady at all? I do find it neat how they officially made Arkham her surname in this universe, especially when, as far as I'm aware, that wasn't ever confirmed for the games. It's hard for me to give full judgment on Mary's story for this season because there's clearly more for us to explore with her in the following episodes, but as it stands, I thought she was fine. She has some real cringy dialogue, and her turnaround could have been handled a bit better, like I said, but as it stands, she was just alright. Also, like Dante, something fans have had a bit of contention for when it comes to Mary in this show is how powerful she is. In this show, they gave Mary a ton of gear and gadgets, primarily as a means for her to keep up with and be on par with Dante. And I'm genuinely surprised how many fans hate this idea. Now, maybe it's just my bias because I like the Lady character, but I personally don't have an issue with them attempting to give her some extra gear and shit to keep up with Dante. And it's not like they make her invincible or has her breezing through every single encounter she's put in. Hell, some of these encounters she barely escapes with her life, and it's neat to see her outsmart her way out of certain spots. I gotta see where her story continues, but like I said, Mary was fine in this show. Her dynamic and interactions with Dante are always a recurring highlight, however. Seriously, whenever these two are on screen together, their chemistry and banter is just really good, and I enjoyed kind of seeing their bitter frenemy dynamic throughout the course of this story. The villains I for the most part enjoyed. I'll talk about Banes and the Rabbit in just a bit, but I kind of want to go over the Rabbit's subordinates first. When I first saw they were using the various bosses from all the previous DMC games, I was genuinely excited, but it kind of sucks how the characterization for a lot of them are just pretty bland and generic. Almost none of the established personalities from the games were even attempted to be brought over. Ones like Agni, Rudra, and Echidna immediately come to mind, because despite all being very unique and having fun personalities, they just get boiled down to being bland goons. Not to mention, I think it's kind of lame that all of these guys seem to be on board with the Rabbit's plan for liberating Makai, when I personally think it would have been more interesting to incorporate what we know about them from the games as a means of motivation for them working with the Rabbit. For example, what if instead of fighting to liberate the demon world, ones like Echidna want to do it as a means of having another world to spread her plants through and shit? Or have Agni and Rudra just want the chance to fight Sparta's son? Maybe not even kill him, just fight him to see what he's capable of or whatever. I'm just throwing ideas around that I think would have made the dynamics amongst the villain characters a little more interesting. I also really wish they kept Agni and Rudra's more polite demeanor. I think it would have made some of the character interactions a bit more fun, and it could have even made them more disturbing as antagonists, if they're not intentionally being evil or malicious. It kind of makes sense for Cavalier Angelo to be a mindless soldier, and I surprisingly really enjoyed Plasma. They took this random-ass enemy from DMC1 and gave him a lot of kick-ass moments throughout the season. But as a whole, these villains could have been a bit better. Vice President Baines I am extremely mixed on, however. I definitely didn't hate his character, but similar to the Macayans, his role in the story is overshrouded by the story's themes. Baines is primarily meant to represent real-world political figures who charge their heinous actions against others as a righteous devotion to God or whatever. I don't dislike this idea for the character, but I kind of hate how heavy-handed it is. That and how he just represents the pure worst of humanity in general. This is another theme for this story that I as well am a bit mixed on. The DMC series has not shied away from having absolutely despicable human villains, but their role in the story more often than not are in service of the Devils Never Cry theme I mentioned earlier. If someone forsakes all aspects of their humanity in pursuit of demonic power, like that of Sanctus, Arius, or Arkham, then they aren't truly human at heart. They are demons. Especially Arkham's bald ass. That nigga is a true devil. Holy shit. This theme puts a more positive perspective on humanity as opposed to a negative one. I'm not saying this franchise can't talk about humanity's flaws or whatever, but the way they went about it here, like so much of the show's writing and themes, is so heavy-handed that it almost starts to feel out of place for a franchise that, like I said, has primarily put a positive perspective on humanity.
I should have known you were human from the start. Your brand of pure psychotic ruthlessness? That's all humanity.
Do you get it, guys? Do you get the message? As far as how this all pertains to Vice President Baines, however, my main problem is that he's so close to fitting the typical mold for the villains I mentioned a bit ago, but the messaging really overtakes that theme, and so it just feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. Like with Dante, I think they were so close to pulling this specific theme off, but they just barely missed it with how they handled it. The man's behavior and actions can be seen as truly demonic, with him callously wiping out anyone who gets in the way of inciting this war, whether they be human or demon, to even treating his subordinates like nothing but cannon fodder. Now, do I think every single human villain in this franchise should fit this exact mold and criteria? No, I think the White Rabbit in this show is a good enough example of that. But as I said, it just felt like they were at least attempting to be consistent with that, but the execution left things a little bit muddy. As it stands, though, I'm kind of indifferent towards Baines. I'm looking forward to seeing more of him, mainly with how it could pertain to Mary's story. And the White Rabbit, probably the most enjoyable aspect of this show when it comes to its cast of characters. I love that they took this relatively minor character from the DMC3 prequel manga and turned him into one of the franchise's best villains. I could not get enough of the Rabbit. He definitely carries most of the scenes he's featured in, whether it be his intense rage or his boisterous bravado. To put it simply, the nigga just has aura off the charts. His backstory I find to be delightfully tragic. An orphan boy who was stuck in an abusive home tries to find escape and solace in the demon world, where the conditions and means of living for the lower Macayans are less than ideal. So he dedicates his entire life to helping his newfound family, and once it seems they can escape the harsh and tyrannical life in Mackay, they're brutally eviscerated by Darkcom. As such, the Rabbit loses his shit and strives to wipe out all of humanity. I think my favorite thing about the Rabbit is how much he contrasts the version of him we see in the flashbacks. It's crazy to see how much he evolves from a well-meaning individual who continuously is dealt a bad hand to the psychotic genocidal maniac who stops at nothing in his wake to get back at the world that took so much from him. To the point where it's even at the expense of the people he claims he wants to liberate and protect. He may say,
I feel every bit of pain that I cause for my people.
But we rarely see him genuinely showcase that. Because at this point, all he wants to see is the world that continuously took everything from him crash and burn. As much as that's all humanity line irritates me, I think that this specific exchange between Mary and the Rabbit perfectly reflects what I mean. It may have started as him wanting to save the Macayans, but at the end of the day, when it really came down to it, he shows he's really not that different from the people he's trying to massacre. The Rabbit is one of those villains that you love for being as diabolical and conniving as they are, but their motivations are easily empathetic, and it makes the Rabbit, outside of Virgil, the most nuanced villain this franchise has done in my opinion. My one problem with the Rabbit isn't even to do with the Rabbit himself, but more so how the other characters react to him. Several times throughout the story, the rabbit will go on a spiel about his view of the world and his very cynical take on it. As an audience member, whenever he does this, given his backstory, it's easy for you to understand and sympathize with his perspective. But given how diabolical he is, it's just really lame that neither Mary or Dante have any kind of rebuttal against him. They never have an equally nuanced perspective to throw back at him or challenge him at all. The last time this happens, it literally just boils down to,
If every demon can cross into this world, humans won't stand a chance. Millions will die.
You aren't listening. Millions already die.
Huh, didn't know that. You're still wrong, though.
which, given everything they had done with the rabbit's character up to this point, kind of feels awkwardly handled. As it stands though, the White Rabbit was fantastic in my opinion. His writing and story is only made even better with the incredible performance of Hoon Lee, aka the best Splinter writing and performance-wise. You can argue with the wall, I don't care. Seriously, Hoon Lee did an absolutely incredible job here. Y'all ever watch a character and whenever they're on screen, you cling on to every word they say because the presence it exudes is so captivating? That's how it was with the rabbit for me. The bravado, the sinister callousness. This line right here.
How do you fit those balls in that skin-tight uniform?
All incredible. The voice acting in general for this show was great. Scout Taylor Compton, I thought was really good as Mary. I wish she had better dialogue, but the voice itself I thought fit the character extremely well. The one I was most on the fence about leading up to this show was Johnny Young Bosch as Dante. Considering the fact that he voices another prominent character in the franchise, Nero, you'd think it'd be pretty distracting to hear a similar voice applied to Dante, and truth be told, that is the case some of the time, but for the most part I think he killed it as Dante. While the voices are similar, I think there's enough of a distinction direction-wise that it allows Netflix Dante to have his own identity that feels at least a bit different from Nero. It just feels right that Bosch got the chance to voice Dante when he initially auditioned for the character in DMC3. He brings enough charm to this Dante that I think would have made me like this version of the character a bit less if he wasn't the one that voiced him. Johnny's been voice acting for ages, so he really knows how to handle those raw emotions. He was just really good, and I can't wait to see what else he brings in the next batch of episodes. This season also featured the late great Kevin Conroy as Vice President Baines, in one of the few roles he recorded before his passing. Needless to say, he was absolutely incredible. Much like the rabbit, Conroy just gives so much life to this character with his intense delivery. It'll be weird to see whoever they choose to replace him in the following episodes, because they got some big friggin' shoes to fill. Chris Capalla as Enzo was pretty good, and I didn't mind what we heard of Robbie Damon's Virgil voice. He's no Dan Southworth, obviously, but he works fine enough. The cast all around I think did a solid job. The animation and art style I as well think was pretty solid. The art style itself isn't anything too extravagant, kinda just looks like a standard animated series for the most part. The lighting and coloring consistently pops however, and it looks great. That and the animation shift they took in episode 6 looks genuinely phenomenal, but this show's animation definitely excels with its action scenes. I'm so glad this show delivered on giving us the high-octane, crazy action set pieces this franchise is known for. Most of the fights have some gorgeous cinematography and choreography. The fight in Dante's office with the mercenaries was sick as hell. Some of Netflix Dante's best and funniest moments are when he's kicking ass, and I love all the homages to the office fight in DMC3. The highway chase was also pretty damn cool, though it does highlight a problem I have with the animation that I'll get into shortly, but it was so damn cool seeing Dante do tricks and shit with the motorcycle, using Agni and Rudra's weapons against them. It was just some really good shit. I especially loved the fights in the last 2 episodes, where Dante has to make sure none of the enemies get his blood, and seeing him come up with various ways to evade and dodge attacks was really entertaining. I find it a little disappointing this show never chose to utilize devil arms. This moment where Dante uses 2 halves of this demon's body that got sliced in half is the closest we get to it, and it's a shame more stuff like that wasn't done throughout the rest of the show. Seeing him fight while holding his breath was also really cool, and the final bout with the rabbit between Dante and Mary just kicked ass. The one problem I have with the animation is its usage of CGI and 3D models. I personally just never liked this kind of art direction for anime. I'm not saying it can't work, but I'm just not a fan of how it was done here. It's mainly applied to the demonic characters, and it really just ends up feeling more distracting than anything else, because the rest of the series looks relatively good, and whenever we switch to these models, it just really takes me out of it. And it irritates me even more knowing that this is likely for budgetary reasons. There were a few shots of characters, whether it be Nello Angelo or Dante's Devil Trigger, Two designs I think look pretty cool, routinely have shots and scenes near the end where they shift from a 3D model to the more 2D direction the series has primarily used. And needless to say, both designs look immensely better. And I just wish the show as a whole stuck to this 2D style. The animation, action, and art style I think looked pretty good. Something else worth noting about this show is the soundtrack. And I'll be honest and say I enjoyed the songs used for the most part. The usage of the licensed songs I think fit the vibe this show was going for. While stuff like nu metal isn't traditionally associated with DMC, I do think it's interesting that they went with a genre of music that was popular around the time the OG game came out. With that in mind, it makes a lot of the song choices feel just a bit more fun, especially given the show's early 2000s setting. Something I really wasn't worried about was them using music from the games. I was more hopeful that the show would bring in some cool new tracks, much like the Madhouse anime did. And I'll get into the show's original songs, but I'll say I do dig the game music that was featured here. We have some solid remixes of songs like Devil Trigger, Bury the Light, and Devils Never Cry, and they sound pretty good. I especially like the latter's remix with it being sung like a lullaby. It's really sweet. Though I will say, when Shankar tried to reassure fans that the show would feature game music, I find it kind of lame that they went with the most popular and obvious picks. We only have the 3 songs I mentioned, with 2 songs from DMC 5 and 1 from DMC 3, and the latter song is only used for the end credits. Meanwhile, Devil Trigger, a song primarily associated with Nero, is given to Dante. For some fucking reason. Like seriously, is it just because it's called Devil Trigger? Come on, I feel like dropping another version of Devils Never Cry here, or Taste of Blood, you know, songs that are actually associated with the character we're focusing on, would have been much more appropriate. The Bury the Light remix is fine, but given the 2 moments the song is played, I feel like it would have been better if one of these moments just didn't have the lyrics blaring in the background, and just had the instrumental playing instead. The original tracks provided by Power Glove I think sounded great. So great that I'm disappointed they didn't take more of a precedent over the licensed tracks. They give so many of the scenes a really good punch, whether they be for the action set pieces or even some of the serious moments. Stuff like Apartment for the big fight in Dante's office and Shapeshifter for Dante's fight with Plasma were both sick as hell. Whatever that song was that played during Dante's battle with the Rabbit's army also sounded really good. Monster might be my second favorite track to come out of this whole show. It just kicks so much ass. I forgot what scene it was featured in, but I highly recommend it for those who haven't listened to it already. The last notable song this show features is Afterlife, performed by none other than Evanescence, which has basically become this show's anthem at this point. This song goes so goddamn hard. No matter what you think of this show, y'all can admit that it was worth it for us to get this freaking song. Just the absolute peak of the emo early 2000s songs I grew up listening to on YouTube, and I genuinely cannot get enough of it. Easily the best track this show introduced. The music in this show, despite the odd usage of some of the game tracks, I think as a whole was pretty good. And I honestly didn't know where else to put this bit, so I guess I'll just put it right near the end. Another point of contention many people have for this show is the showrunner himself, one Adi Shankar. Now, before this show released, like I said, I initially knew Shankar from him being attached to Netflix's Castlevania, a show I very much enjoy. Well, at least the first 2 seasons anyway. And leading up to this show, like I said, I personally had no reason to think I wouldn't enjoy it based on Shankar being attached to that show. And I'm bringing this up because before the show came out, and hell, even recently, I see a lot of people strongly link their frustrations with Netflix DMC to Shankar. Makes sense, he's the showrunner. But back then, I just remember being so confused on the negative air that surrounded Shankar whenever he or this show was mentioned. To the point where when I was initially planning out this video, I was mentally preparing myself to do this very segment, except it was going to be about me explaining my confusion on just the constant negative air that surrounded Adi Shankar, because I just didn't get it. Now I do. Whether it be his rather concerning political affiliations, or his alleged very sketchy history within the Hollywood industry. Y'all can dig more into that stuff if you're interested. I'm mainly going to be talking about stuff that pertains to him and this show. You see, the thing that's crazy about enjoying this show is that it gets a little hard when knowing the fact that the creator is a giant fucking tool, to put it mildly. In the same way this show kind of brought out and showcased the worst of the DMC fandom, that might be a conversation I have for another time, the same can strangely almost be applied to Shankar as well. You see, I've known Shankar has been quite the character for years. When he initially announced his DMC show wearing shit like this and saying shit like that, which is so fucking funny that he had that kind of attitude about it back then. But then when it came to him putting together the actual show, he used a large myriad of generic writing techniques that ended up making the show slightly worse, but that's whatever. That factoid of Shankar being a sort of character who will go very extreme about his opinions and his appreciation for the IPs he's a fan of still reigns true. His presence on social media largely consists of him trolling and saying a bunch of BS that is generally just meant to get a rise out of people. But with a lot of these interactions, the line between him being serious and him trolling starts to get a little blurry. And in a lot of instances showcases another problem with Shankar. And it's his frankly big and unchecked ego. You see, when Shankar came onto the scene talking about his DMC show, I respected his drive to sort of bring the franchise into the limelight. I remember him saying something a while ago about him using his position to bring more niche franchises into the spotlight. And again, I respected his attitude when it came to that. But with his online presence and some interviews he's been in recently, where he expressed his initial frustrations with the announcement of DMC5 way back when, because he was in the midst of getting his own DMC show in order. And it, to me, seems like we're dealing with someone who has just a bit too big of a savior complex. Another weird trait that Shankar routinely exhibits is the fact that he's kind of a persistent liar for, no real reason. He has said numerous times that he wasn't going to change anything major or concrete about the DMC world for this show, whether it be the characters or some of the world building and stuff. For this specific example, I'm going to hone in on the character of Lady because I feel like that's the most relevant. He said numerous times that he hasn't made changes to her story, but most fans, if they know her from the games and see this show, you can clearly tell that the man changed quite a lot. Arkham isn't even a prominent part of her journey for this show. Not to mention, her general personality has been exaggerated to a point where she feels a bit far removed from her game counterpart to be considered the same character. Yeah, you changed a lot about the character and her story. There's nothing wrong with just admitting that. And I'll just play devil's advocate and say that if Lady's story is the same in the show as it is in the games, there's also nothing wrong with just keeping your mouth shut and waiting for people to be proven wrong. And I'm only saying this because Shankar does have a tendency to spoil certain things if it means he can prove a point. With that in mind, I wouldn't be surprised if come season 2, Arkham's bald ass strolls up in a jester outfit and they do some bullshit with that. But that's honestly just me speculating at this point. And I don't even know if I should put this under the lying section, but I will bring this up because I do just find it somewhat interesting. When he initially announced his DMC show way back when, he put it under his Bootleg Universe branch, along with Netflix's Castlevania, where he basically reinvents and twists certain things about the IPs he's adapting, and just generally doing something more unique with them. Now he's putting his DMC show under his Adi Shankar Animation branch, where apparently he's playing things completely straight and honoring the franchise's core essence. And even as a fan of this show, I can't help but just read that and think, seriously? This? Whether it be from his online presence, as I mentioned a bit ago, or his generally obnoxious behavior, it just kind of paints the show in a worse light for some people. The show isn't even that good, and then you got the creator acting like a fool, making it less fun for everybody. The petty bitch in me almost wants this Netflix DMC shit to crash and burn, purely because it'd be so funny to see Shankar get humbled after how he's been acting recently. But at the same time, the DMC fan in me is kind of just curious to see where this train is headed, and see what this branch of the DMC universe has in store. I think now y'all might start to see why I titled the video the way that I did. As a whole, Netflix DMC is a solid watch, with great action and animation, a pretty interesting cast of characters to follow throughout, even if not perfectly written, a really great voice cast. It gives us a myriad of new interesting concepts and ideas for the DMC world, which I think are really neat. I really didn't get into it all that much, but I like them making Sparta's rebellion have some unintended consequences. It just adds a new layer of mystique to his decision and his disappearance. It also has a pretty cool soundtrack, but the writing really holds this thing back. With dialogue that barely leaves any room for imagination, and for some characters making them seem unnecessarily edgy and juvenile. Not to mention, the story's themes take far too much center stage, with them constantly feeling the need to shout the message out loud in your face. Get it, guys? Do you get the message? And it would have been immensely more tolerable had they just dialed it back by 50 or 60%. There are also just a few holes in the writing that I didn't really get into all that much. Just certain spots where things feel a bit contrived to move the plot forward. If the rabbit wanted this nigga to destroy his device, why didn't he just leave it on the building where literally everything was getting destroyed in the fight with the rabbit? The weird thing with this show is that I just can't see it as something put together out of malice or spite like so many other people do. It just incorporates too many interesting things for me personally as a longtime fan to enjoy that I just can't see it that way. I'm really hoping episode 6 wasn't just a fluke, and they do more storytelling like that throughout the show, because it's kind of the main thing telling me that the people putting this together really do give a shit about what they're doing, and are capable of telling some amazing stories. It's clear that Shankar is a big fan of this series, but I really think he should have held himself back with delivering the message he wanted to deliver, and let the more DMC-centric stuff take center stage. All things considered though, the show is just kinda mediocre at worst in my opinion. I think there are far worse pieces of media out there attached to beloved video game franchises. And since I'm here, if you were to ask me which DMC show I think is better, I feel like some DMC fans are going to want to lynch my ass for what I'm about to say next. But if we're going just based off of these 8 episodes and not counting whatever the hell will happen in season 2, I'd still say the Netflix version is more worth watching. That's not me saying it's leagues better than the Madhouse version, because it really isn't. I only give it the edge because I just find the overall story slightly more interesting. In my opinion, we still have yet to receive a genuinely good Devil May Cry anime. And whenever this Netflix shit runs its course, hopefully sometime in the distant future, someone else could take a crack at it. Because I really think the format of serialized storytelling can work well with Devil May Cry. As far as this one goes, however, I think it's just alright. So, with all that said, if you agree or disagree with anything I've said in this video, let me know right down there in the comments below. Also, be sure to like and subscribe. This has been Darion GNB, and take care.